right, hello everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful day today and have had a wonderful week. If you're watching this at the end of the week, if you're watching this at the beginning of the next week, I hope you have a wonderful week to come up with. All right, so today I want to talk to you about the idea of making choices and how when we have something going on in our life, in reality, we have two choices, two paths. Obviously, within that choice, you may have a lot more choices to make that are very tangible and or specific to the path or quote unquote choice, where you're going to use that word a lot, that you're taking. But what I want to talk about is the idea of choosing either the negative state or the positive state. You could also think of this as the idea of choosing safety over growth. So Abraham Maslow, and I don't really know who that is, but I found his quote and said it so beautifully. I'm going to read this to you guys. One can choose to go back towards safety or go forward towards growth. Growth must be chosen again and again, and fear must become overcome again and again. And to me, that was so spectacular because it is so true. One, mindset does not come naturally to people. Having a growth mindset is something that requires you to constantly work at, to constantly make the deliberate choice to move forward with growth versus stay within your safety zone. Our brain wants to keep us safe, and it does this by forcing you to feel and to experience and to see the pieces that make it hard in a way that makes it scary to go through those hard pieces. So when you're doing something, anything in life, whether that's making a decision, whether that's moving through an injury, trying to overcome the dark places in a race, choosing a new relationship, making a change, those require you to make an intentional and deliberate choice to move forward through it versus just stay right where you are. And you may be saying, well, that's the harder choice. Yes, it is the harder choice. But I always ask you the question, is it really harder? At the end of the day, is moving towards growth actually harder? Because if you sit down and think about it, more often than not, when you choose to stay exactly what you are, it becomes harder. Why? Because of how you feel internally. How that staying makes you feel and how you respond to that internally. Versus when you focus on choosing growth and choosing change and choosing to move forward, you find something new about yourself. So yes, technically moving forward and picking growth and change and the positive path may be harder from a technical standpoint, but what it produces is so much greater that it becomes easier. Sometimes you have to sit there and ask yourself, is this actually harder? What is harder? Why does it feel harder? And what will the result produce? What result will come out of me staying here versus growing? And usually when you sit down and think about that, or write about it, journal about it, ruminate over that question, what you find is that it's actually easier to move forward in growth than it is to stay put. You always have to choose. It takes deliberate, intentional choices every single day to move through something, to be decisive and stick to it. Whenever you're in doubt, that's what you have to say. You have to say, no, I'm making this choice. I'm choosing me. I'm choosing my path. I'm choosing to move forward. Because if you look back on your life, and maybe look back on a month, maybe you look back on a year, 5 years, 10 years, It's one of those that the only time you live in regret is when you choose to not move forward. And none of us want to live in regret. None of us want to. So, how do we make these decisions? How do we move forward constantly in growth? We have to recognize, one, that the decision will never be easy. Moving forward in growth is never going to be easy. And it is going to take time. It is also going to take focus. It is going to be hard. It's going to take every single day you choosing to make a different choice. The other piece is, two, you really need to recognize where you're at the moment. So if you're walking through something, maybe you're walking through an injury, or you're walking through a relationship piece, or you're walking through a job change, you need to recognize how you're feeling. So you need to acknowledge it. That's number two. Acknowledge how you're feeling. We cannot move forward in growth if we don't acknowledge how we feel. But the difference is, the big difference is, are you going to stay in that acknowledgement, or are you going to move through it? That is the difference. That's where you become mentally tough, is when you choose to move through it. But you can't move through something if you don't know what it is. You can't move through something if you don't recognize how it makes you feel. And you can't move through something if you don't acknowledge what it's doing to you in that moment, because then you can't make a change. We can't ever make a change if we don't know what's going on. So you always have to acknowledge that piece first. And then the last piece that I think is really important is to do it in small steps. So number 3 is make small changes. Small changes make big changes. That is my favorite saying. I say it to everyone. I say it to almost all of my clients. I say it to myself on a regular basis, but small changes make big changes. We want to walk towards growth. We can't just leap over the cliff because we don't know. We can. And it's important to leap. But in that leaping, we have to create action items that we can do on a regular basis that make up the bigger picture. Remember, your journey is the biggest piece of the outcome. Our journey is 80%. The outcome is 20%. And you cannot get to the outcome without taking each step, without walking through the action items. So when we want to leap, when we want to make change, when we want to step towards growth, we have to create actions behind it. And we want to focus on the small pieces. Start small, right? If we're using triathlon as an example, it's very rare that you find someone who can just dive in and say, I'm going to do an Ironman. I've never even swam. I don't own a bike. I will say I have one athlete that has done it, but she's an anomaly. Most of the time, we have to start with the sprint, then move to the Olympic, then the 70.3, and then move into the full distance Ironman. Little baby steps, small pieces. You choose to make small changes in your life, they will add up to big changes. And they will allow you to continually create routines that keep you focused on choosing growth over being stagnant. So those are my 3 tips. My 3 tips to moving towards growth. Taking small steps towards growth on a regular basis. And remember, sometimes choosing growth seems like the harder piece. Sometimes it seems like it's going to be the most challenging path. But at the end of the day, when you really ask yourself, if I look at the result, which one is really harder? Which one's harder on me? Who am I going to become? And when I can answer those questions more often than not, I find that the harder path is actually easier. So that is my challenge to you for this week. To continue every day to choose growth. to choose overcoming fear every day. And I want you to do that by doing one thing for me. I want you to run towards failure this week. I want you to choose something that scares you, or that maybe is something that is challenging for you, something that you've been struggling to get yourself to do. And I want you to do it. And then I want you to ask yourself, how do I feel after this? This can be a lot of things. Maybe you need to have a tough conversation with someone and you've been putting it off. That's a run towards failure. Maybe it's something where you wanted to start running and you're afraid to start running. Start running this week. See what happens. How do you feel about it? Run 3 times for 20 minutes. These failures, this idea of running towards failure doesn't have to be massive. And in fact, it shouldn't be. Start small. Pick something that is really hard for you to contemplate doing and go for it. See what happens. See how it makes you feel to run towards failure and overcome fear and choose growth. I almost can guarantee you it will surprise you and you'll find something really amazing about yourself. Comment below on what your run towards failure is. I'd love to hear it from you guys. Have fun with it. And remember, you guys, growth is scary, but it's also amazing. Have a good one.